Bhagvat Gita, Chapter 1, Part 2. It is very difficult to understand the Bhagavad Gita without studying the Vedas, the Upanishads, and different systems of Hindu philosophy. For this reason, various commentators explain different ideas and problems that are discussed in these lines variously. Acharya Shankara said in the introduction of his commentary of the Gita, the first chapter of the Gita is devoted to a description of the army, the various warriors, and where they stood and what they did. The teachings of Krishna began with the second chapter. The first chapter begins thus. Sanjaya was the one who heard the discussion between Krishna and Arjuna. After the battle was over, he came to the court of Dhritarashtra, the blind father of Duryodhana. The father said, "Describe the battle, how they fought from the beginning. What did the Pandavas, the 5 brothers, do when they assembled on the sacred plain of Kurukshetra?" Sanjaya said, "Having seen the army of the Pandavas drawn up in battle array, Duryodhana approached his teacher, Dronacharya, who was the instructor in military science of all the princes on either side. Dronacharya was the instructor in military science of all princes on either side. Dronacharya knew that Duryodhana would be defeated. Yet he took the position of a general in the army of the latter, as he was supported by his court and could not be disloyal to him. He asked Drona, "Look upon this grand army drawn up in the battle array by Drupada and thy talented disciple." He then described the different great heroes with diverse weapons and their skill of fighting. The first chapter begins with the dialogues between Dhritarashtra and Sanjaya. Arjuna thereafter took up his bow and said to Krishna, the charioteer, "Place my chariot between the 2 armies so that I may see with whom I must fight in this battle. I wish to observe those assembled here." Rishikesha, or Krishna, thus addressed, drove the chariot between the 2 armies and said, "O son of Pritha, look at this assembled Kurus ready to fight." When the son of Kunti saw all the kinsmen standing, he was overcome with deepest pity and said in sorrow, "A tremor comes over my body and my hair standing on end. The great bow slips from my hand and my skin is burning. My mind is whirling round, as it were, nor do I see any good from killing my kinsmen in battle. I desire no victory. Of what value is pleasure, or even life itself? Those for whose sake we desire these things stand here in battle. I do not wish to kill them, even for the sake of dominion." And thus Arjuna went on saying that he was not ready to fight. His heart was overcome with pity and his eyes were filled with tears. Krishna said, "Hence hath his pitiful state come upon thee, and why this weakness of heart? Yield not to unmaligness or weakness of heart, O son of Pritha, but rise and fight." Arjuna said, "How shall I slay in battle with arrows Bhishma and Drona, who are worthy of worship? Better indeed to live in this world upon arms than to slay those worthy of great honor." So he dropped his bow in the chariot and said that he would not fight. He was extremely grieved. His eyes were filled with tears, and his heart was overcome with sorrow. thinking of those on the battlefield and surveying both armies while the weapons were beginning to be discharged. Sri Krishna rebuked Arjuna, the great warrior, and told him to shake off all his weaknesses. While he was grieving in the midst of the armies, Krishna spoke these words: Arjuna, being in the warrior caste, was obliged to fight for a righteous cause and for justice. He did not think of his kinsmen or relatives before coming to the battlefield. He was very enthusiastic and did everything to organize. He was the commander and had a large army. But after seeing his relatives and friends and thinking of the result of the battle, he hesitated and thought, what good would come to such a fight? His heart was filled with pity and sorrow. He became nervous and lost his head, and so he wanted to retire from the battlefield at that moment. Krishna said, "No, that is not manliness." Krishna found that cause of his grief and sorrow was not right knowledge, it was attachment and ignorance. And he tried to remove the cause of his sorrow and grief and bring in the light of self-knowledge. Another thing you must remember, that when you study the Bhagavad Gita, you should compare the battlefield of Kurukshetra with this phenomenal world. There are two sides. One is virtue, another is vice. And the individual soul is the commander-in-chief of the chariot of the body, with all the armies and different forces that are working in the body. And Sri Krishna is the divine spirit of Paramatma within us. It also happens that when he was placed between the enemies in the midst of any fight, we generally feel grieved sorely and do not know what step to take, and then we take advice of the divine intelligence, buddhi, and discriminative faculty, vivek, dwelling within us, and if we follow the advices of buddhi and viveka like true disciples, we gain good results. Although for the time being we may be drawn by attachments for this or that, we may begin to think that it was not right, and what is present seems to be wrong, must not be wrong in the end, and what all present seems to be right may be wrong in the end. We all are self-deluded men in the battlefield of this world. So, as long as we are in the charming and enchanting power of the world, which is no other than Maya or nescience, we do not know which is which, just as in the dim twilight we do not identify anything correctly. As for example, looking at the dead trunk of a tree, we cannot distinguish whether it is a man or a trunk. So in the partial light of our knowledge, we do not know what will be the right path. So when we come to, as a disciple to a wise man, we get the proper light, and then we understand which is the path of righteousness. So the description of the battlefield in Bhagavad Gita can be applied to anyone living in this world, in any country, at any time. Thank you.